if the sale would have happened,
Yeah, it's the good with the bad, right?
Yeah.
It's the highs of the highs when you've been working towards that. It's the exit and you do it, and then the lows of losing some of the closest people. And I commend you for how you've gone through this. And obviously it's a very touchy subject, and I really do appreciate you coming on and sharing more with us. Okay, I gotta my back's against the wall, I gotta figure this out. And then the highs of the highs where it's we're looking to sell this business for millions of dollars. How awesome is that?
Yeah. And as a general rule, I think those that are really successful and able to handle things, have hope and look for the positive side. God doesn't give us these kind of things for no reason.
What's going on, everybody? My name is Ryan Snod. It rhymes with odd, and you're listening to the Rhymes with Odd podcast. Today, we're welcomed with another wonderful guest. We have Trent Murphy in the house from Ankeny, Iowa. What's going on, Trent?
Oh, not a whole lot. Just trying to get up every day and do something new.
Very cool, very cool. Well, I think this is going to be a great show today because we have so much we can talk about, and I think you have a lot of interesting perspectives and positioning of kind of your life experience, business ownership, exiting a business, which we'll talk about, community involvement, and just the whole 9 yards. So really, really fired up to have you on the show today.
Well, thanks for having me.
Sure. So kind of give the people a little bit of overview of who you are and what you do currently.
Trent Murphy, grew up in Bondurant, Iowa, small town, went to Simpson College.
Roll Storm.
Yep, Roll Storm. It was the Redmen back when we were there.
Oh, right.
So I'm kind of the last of the Redmen. They nicked that back in the 90s.
Sure.
Went to Drake University for my master's in education, was going to be a environmental science major and biology minor, intended to work for the DNR as a law enforcement DNR. Simpson has really good criminal justice and stuff. But ended up meeting a really good professor, Dr. Magruder, and ended up going into education. So taught high school science, biology. I've taught everything from chemistry, physics, biology, environmental science, astronomy, which is not astrology, geology. Really enjoyed the hard sciences and less of the life sciences, and did that for 9 years. Ida Grove, Iowa, West Des Moines Valley, and then Gilbert High School, Gilbert, Arizona. The whole time I was doing that, I was coaching wrestling. Wanted to wrestle in college, which was one of the reasons I ended up at Simpson probably. Got hurt. Ended up lettering and sport associated with football at Simpson College, cheerleading. So
okay.
Most people laugh when I tell them that. So it's been a long road. Went from teaching and coaching to taking over a family business. Moved back from Arizona to take that over. I wanted to move. Our oldest daughter was going to kindergarten, so didn't necessarily want her to go to Gilbert High School or Gilbert, where the high school I was teaching at was 3,500 9th through 12th grade kids. I mean, it was a small college, bigger than Simpson. So.
Sure. So yeah, it sounds like your path's kind of taking you all over the place. Like you said, you started in Iowa and then ended up moving out to Arizona and then back to Iowa too. So tell me a little bit about that transition period from education to coming back to Iowa for the family business. What drove you to come back?
When I was teaching at Valley, I was a department chair. I was one of the youngest department chairs, largest science department in Iowa. I was probably 28, and went to Arizona because every summer I'd work for my dad in collections and credit. They would take vacation. We had, worked out of the basement of his house and then had a small office, no employees. And I would go and do collections and work there. Spring break, I would take over, and my mom and my dad would go somewhere, and I would work because I needed the money. I was teaching and really liked it, thought I could grow it. Ended up staying in teaching, got my master's, and was going to go into administration, and I said I can do this, moved back from Arizona, and said if I muck it up too bad, I keep my teaching license, and took over as president of the company. We had one employee at the time, and up in uptown Ankeny and on Walnut, and ended up growing the company.
That's crazy because I know when I first met you, I think the company had 20, 30 employees, something like that. Is that right, or was there?
Yeah,
more?
we got up to 23 was
okay.
I think it was our height. 10 to 15 was kind of the sweet spot, and we were growing when you met us, and we were trying to extend it. That was our fourth building, I think, that we had been in. So by the time we got where you were at, where you saw the company, we had went from mixed match desk to, actually looking like an office.
Sure.
But
Sure. What's that transition like going from like a mom and pop? Because the business was this factoring business, right? So for people that don't know, what is factoring? It's
if you have a service or a product that you've delivered or had, and you have an invoice, usually corporate takes 30 to 50 to 60 days to pay. We're kind of like a check cashing center, but primarily transportation. So a truck driver would move a load from point A to point B. Somebody owed money, continental United States. They'd send us the invoice. We'd pay them less a discount, and we'd collect. And we'd act as their credit department because a lot of the over-the-road independent people, small businesses. One of my smallest businesses in 2008 went from coming to us in Ankeny, and now they're a multi-million-dollar business in Ankeny that I can't talk about, but they're doing very well. And the owner sold his part of it, and I think he has an island or something down in the Bahamas. So
nice. Good people to be friends with.
Keep saying I'm going to email them. I want to visit. So,
Sure. That's exciting. It sounds like the client list was growing with the business too, which is pretty exciting.
Yeah, and diversity. So we mostly are transportation. We got out of that a little bit into staffing agencies. If you have nurses and you need nurse staffing, you have to pay them at the end of the week. Well, Medicare doesn't pay for a while, so a lot of cash flow issues. And banks usually look at your assets. And so for us, the asset was your customer and the work that you did, where a bank looks at your access.
Access. It's a hard one.
Assets.
Oh, assets.
Assets, like your house,
yes,
right?
Yes.
Or your car, and says, well, you need this to back it up, and we didn't do it that way. So I always would say, a banker, when it's rainy, won't give you an umbrella, but we would.
Sure. Sure. That's great. Well, I think it definitely was providing like a service for people that were, like you said, they just need that. It's not a bank situation, but it's like, I just need somebody to help with that.
And a lot of small businesses, so we're able to go in and give them advice on certain things, and bookkeeping or taxes. Mm-hmm. I mean, we weren't professional in taxes or anything, but we'd say, hey, you really need to understand that if you bring in receivables, that's not all taxable, because you do have costs that you can write off, and please get a CPA to do that, because when they do 1099s, they say your company made $100,000. You're like, I didn't make $100,000. So it was kind of nice talking to younger. A lot of our business was a lot of foreign nationals, like Bosnian. You were in that space, so a lot of working through some of that stuff. But
sure. So how long was the business in existence before you came on board?
It started in 1993 in the basement of my dad's house on Applewood in Ankeny. I took over, I started helping in probably 95, moved in 97, took over in 2000. So Dad started in 93, so
sure.
Fairly quickly. Back then, he did everything on, well, he didn't have an accounting system, so I put it all back on a Mac on Excel spreadsheets. So we kind of moved from there. That was the accounting. And then, later on, as you grew, my dad also started JMS Transportation out of Cedar Rapids, Iowa. It was Jim, Mike, and Scott. CGM Financial was Connie, Jim Murphy. I was a Murphy. So, just kind of in those areas, you just throw a letter on there, and that's your new business.
Sure. That's exciting. So it sounds like did he have an introduction to trucking to even know this was a problem, or did he have a background in banking when he stared it?
No, he ended up testifying in federal court against his boss, who was in trucking, while I was coaching his kid at Valley. So long story short is he was in banking, went into a trucking company as a credit collection, a very large company here in Des Moines. The owner had moved money from the trucking company to his construction company and bankrupt the trucking company.
Oh, okay.
And at that point, the secured creditors hired my dad to come in, clean up all the receivables. He did a really good job, so he'd go into small trucking companies and either reorg or liquidate them. And he said, that really sucks. So he said, we could probably get ahead of that. And if you do the factoring, that gets in front of the receivables, so they have their cash flow, and they're not waiting for somebody to pay them, and you can kind of get in front of what's going on. A lot of times we get in front of their payables. It's like, okay, well, we're going to buy the receivable, and we're going to pay your insurance, so you stay in business, because it's in our interest that you stay in business. So sometimes people wouldn't give them a loan for their trailer. We would come in and say, well, they'll subordinate X, and that's how I ended up with one of my biggest clients because the IRS was after him, and I think the only time I ever got a subordination letter from the IRS said that they would take second line to my company.
Oh, wow.
So
and the IRS can pretty much do whatever they want.
Yeah, they can do anything they want. And I still have that letter in my office or frame saying this is the one time I ever had the IRS subordinate to CJM Financial. So he started doing that, and that was because he ended up having to testify, and then the banks came in and said, we'd like you to go in these other companies and get in front of them and liquidate. And it was a very large one out of Chicago. And at that point, you get kind of nervous because there's not really good players there. So in Chicago, you're running in some, they always say mafia. Yeah, they do exist.
Sure,
Especially in trucking and Teamster. I mean, back then it was it wasn't as above board.
Oh, sure.
Because they deregulated, and when they deregulated, everything kind of got crazy Wild West for a while. So.
Sure. So tell me a little bit about, you came in, just kind of took the company over when your dad handed off to you. What'd you guys do to grow it to 20? You were a teacher, and now you're like growing a trucking factoring company. Like, what happened there?
Well, motivation.
Sure.
I came in and negotiated with my parents. I got my teaching salary, which I didn't realize it was the same as teaching. But teaching, I worked 188 days a year. I had insurance. I got home at 3, 4, 5 o'clock, and I took over that company. Didn't have enough money to make my car payment because I signed up for teaching salary. Renee was in transition, was working in medical transcription. And so I delivered pizzas for a year and a half at Domino's and was president of a company. And we had one employee, and he thought he was on his way out because, the son came in and there was only room for one employee. And I promised him I'd grow it. I said, one, I want you to keep your job. And I don't mean to scare you. And 2, I said, I really want a new car, and I don't want to deliver pizzas for the rest of my life.
I love it.
So I spent a lot of time on the phone and did active sales. Dad had always done passive sales, so it was always word of mouth. We had a really good, reputation as a small company in Iowa, and so I just started growing it. I started growing it with farmers. Every farmer is a trucking company. Only during, during season, they're moving grain, but after that, they're like, oh, we can move freight, and we have the license. And they all were pretty honest and just thought people would pay them.
Sure.
So I spent a lot of time on the road in Iowa talking to farmers, saying, I know you have this trucking company, but it's really just moving grain, and and they'd get burnt. So, and we'd act as that buffer, and, where they wouldn't pay them, they would pay us. So.
Sure. So, how long did it take you to go from the 2 employees to 23 when you ended up exiting the company?
I went really, the first year, I was frustrated. Negotiating with your parents isn't that fun.
Because they still owned it and you were just an employee?
They owned it, yeah.
Okay.
I was just an employee. I was president of the company. They owned it. I doubled their revenue. And I said, I don't want to deliver pizzas anymore. And I could go back teaching and with my master's, and they've already offered me a job. A good friend of mine who's now principal at Valley, and she's like, we need you back here. And I enjoyed teaching. I loved it. It was a great profession. It still is. And so I was at that crossroads. Do I just go back into my career, become a principal, do it that way? Or I thought I could grow the company. I thought it was, untapped potential. We were doing everything, still photocopying stuff, still on Excel spreadsheets, still doing it clunky. I thought I could streamline a little more. So we could do more volume. I also thought I could get the money from the bank by actively being involved with my dad. He wasn't there all day. My mom wasn't either. I ran it for the year, and so to grow it, I just, like I said, was motivated to do it. I didn't want to stay where I was at. So I negotiated a new contract with them that had kickers. So if I grew at X, then I got a raise. If I grew at X, I got a raise. They put in stopgaps that said, well,
like cap your income if it was like,
cap it
okay,
at,
we're
well,
doing like
it was
20
4
million
years.
and I want.
Yeah, and it was a timeline. So I it was a 4-year plan, and I knocked it out in 2. So I had to wait for the other 2 years for my raises. So
they're just beating you down, right?
Oh yeah, they were tough.
Not giving you any breaks for being the kid either.
Well, and that's the funny thing is I was talking to a very large trucking company. I was collecting on them, and the owner said, you were born with a silver spoon in your mouth, and I said, you don't even know who I am.
Sure.
So, but
You're like, this spoon has been dumped in vinegar, and I've been forced to keep it in my mouth
yeah,
for
there was
too long.
It wasn't a gift, that was for sure. But it made you earn it. But again, it was just, I think it was more of, it was an industry that wasn't tapped. The banks had got into it and they got killed because they were looking at the customer as the debtor, and I look at the debtor as the person I'm giving credit to. So banks had just had a different lens. And then I sell the company to a bank now. So
Sure. That's pretty wild. And I think just what was the timeline from when you started to when you exited? Was it like
23 years.
Okay. So you
Or
basically
20. I started in 2020 and I sold it in 2021. Yeah, 21.
Okay. So it was like, so basically grew an employee a year for like 20 years. Through that whole process, what other businesses did you start? Because there's like a laundry list of things, because you go from being a teacher to like haphazardly stumbling into running a business, does really well. What other stuff did you end up starting and maybe stopping or still doing even 20 years?
I can tell you all the ones that I didn't make that started. We started started a social media company, but that was more Renee's expertise. She started Salon Connects with somebody else, which was more of that expertise, but the idea to do it. Murphy Enterprises, which was started out as just I don't really want to say it on air, is a really good tax shelter for cars.
Sure.
So, you have a really expensive car, and the state of Iowa wants $1,000 a year for plates. So if you have a dealer plate, it's $45 for every 2 years.
Oh, smart.
So it was, just that cash flow alone. And there were, expectations. You got to go to class once a year and some other things. But really was hoping to just make that work. That turned in from a car dealership to now it's just a holding company for property and rentals.
Sure.
It's more important to have an LLC. I was incorporated under CJM Financial. It's an S corp. It was flow through, but LLCs give you a little more latitudes on certain things.
Sure. And then you can have like a holding company and get to the proper protections. So if someone's like, hey, this car that you sold me that you didn't want, then now it's like, well, they don't have to come back on you.
Yeah.
They can kind of put the layers of defense in there.
Yeah, you don't ever want to be pierce that corporate veil.
Sure.
Just because you really need to stay segmented when it comes to certain things, certain risk. Got into Shamrock Transport Trucking Company, DSM Advantage, a brokering company. Also owned Diamond Express Logistics, which my brother out of Cedar Rapids, and he was from Johnston. Did that for a while. Priority Capital, we got up to about 190 power units that we were leasing out, and at least 200-300 trailers.
That in the logistics realm still? Or
yep, that was just leasing out to owner operators.
Okay.
Trucking. So it was all in that transportation space, but it was all a different venue. I really wanted to get into bookkeeping. I had a really good employee that could do the bookkeeping. And my daughter was pretty good at bookkeeping, so I said we should just go in and do the bookkeeping for our clients because we're already in front of everything. We see everything coming in, so if we see everything coming in, we can make sure it's recorded correctly and then see everything going out and make sure that they get their credit so that you don't pay taxes on expenses kind of thing. So
Sure. So we're up to 9. I think I'm counting, like I'm losing fingers. I have like 9 businesses that have been started.
Yeah.
Was there a 10th one to round it out? I feel like there's something we're missing.
Yeah, there's... It started with Laura. We were having a conversation about Orbis. So we've done a lot with Orbis, which is the high school program for kind of school to work. So in Ankeny, you could be at Centennial, you can be at Ankeny High School. We have Polk City kids. So it's not just codependent on that. And that'll probably be Ankeny's third rounded high school, more of a magnet school. But the Orbis program was started with Dr. Ulrich, who's a good friend of ours. And so it kind of grew that. And then out of that, you want to teach students how to do something. So after sold CJM, had some investment capital. I knew I wanted to put some in the market. I wanted to put some in hard assets, land. And so got a couple partners that were realtors and lawyers and started a company called Just Ride. So it's right on the bike trail.
Oh.
So Ankeny's really doing a huge push for biking, and Ankeny is kind of a hub. That's why they put the High Trestle Bridge kind of there in Ankeny on Ore Labor. It's tied to the High Trestle Trail. A lot of hotels and stuff are coming up. So started Just Ride, and then out of Just Ride came toasted roasted Marys.
Okay.
I had this auto hauler trailer that I bought that wasn't doing anything, and I had this idea that I really wanted to sell English muffins. And somebody said, "Well, Bloody Marys." I'm like, "Yeah, but English muffins." So you can say, "Well, it's toasted Marys."
Okay.
And so that's how it kind of came about. Worked with the Orbis kids on the Just Ride part. So when we did that, we had to buy some houses that were in commercial areas, but we had to lease them out. So then you had the city come in, you had to have inspections. So the students would have to call the city, do the inspection, come through the rental properties, and say, "Well, you have to put a GFI outlet here." And so that was good for them. They were
So you're the time between the students, the community, and your kind of business itch. It sounds like you're just scratching that itch.
So we were able to do that. But the food trailer will be kind of fun because, they grow out, and I call them age out, so they go to college. And we were hoping to do some stuff this summer and sell some stuff, but we don't. The RAGBRAI coming through town isn't going to work.
Sure.
So he's putting some stipulations and a lot of cost. But so then hopefully this entity will then turn into next generation. So we'll teach them how to grow that business, other things we can do with it, and then eventually sell it. Sell the trailer. What's it look like to sell a company? So I'm hoping next year's group of Orbis students that take on the project, and Joey does it too. So we'll just go through that whole process, and so that'll be like it's companies, but it's more of a learning,
It's kind of like an incubator.
Yeah.
Or like it sounds like you started yes, you give them the trailer, but you're letting them operate it. You're not out there making muffins and trying to get their apron on. Like you're letting them kind of do the legwork and practice. It sounds like you're reciprocating the fun that your parents gave to you 20 years ago to learn. And that's really what entrepreneurship is, right? It's just you have to learn by doing. I thought it was so interesting. Like my wife was doing a entrepreneurship class in high school because she wanted to have a business degree as tied to her hair salon degree. She wanted to maybe own her own business someday. But I was reading, I'm like, you can't, there's a book with those entrepreneurship 101. I'm like, they can't make a book about this. You got to do it. That's literally what it is. It's doing. So it's kind of crazy.
But I think that's hard too. I've had professors that taught management, and I was coaching or teaching at the time. I took a management class because I needed to go back in and try to figure out some business stuff if I was going to take over and work in my parents' business. And I was teaching, and so I went back to some classes, and it was hard because they would give you scenarios, and I'm like, well, when's the last time that's happened? Because it doesn't work that way. And so I think that's kind of difficult in kind of the educational world. Like I said, it's a book, but this hands-on learning is probably more effective. Sure.
Well, and I thought, because I went to Simpson as well, and I thought that was a really big part of because I did management with sociology, and to graduate, you have to do a senior capstone where you start a business and you grow it and you launch it before the semester is done. So our kind of group project was like a student-run marketing agency. And that was a really interesting experience because it's like you can read all you want, and then even going back, like I went and visited Orbis, and I went back to we call it CEO, so Collegiate Entrepreneurship Organization, and I've went in, and it's like you can tell when the kids are just trying to get the grade, but then you can really tell when people apply themselves, and it's like, okay, how do we actually solve a problem? Because I think those are you left college thinking, oh, I'm gonna maybe do the DNR thing, maybe teach. And now it's now I got to solve this problem in real life of how do I make sure that my one employee can eat and has enough money to pay his rent at the end of the month? It's it's all just solving problems, right?
But they never ever teach you how to fire an employee, which is the worst. I always said, teaching and coaching was a lot of fun if it wasn't for all the students and parents. And being an entrepreneur, a business owner, if it wasn't for all the clients and the employees, I would just keep doing it. So,
sure.
But yeah, there's some things you just got to learn the hard way. And if you don't have the skill set or the experience in other parts to get through it, that's why I like the Orbis program, or, you call it serial entrepreneur, but it's always something fun to do.
Sure.
If it's not fun, I'm like, I don't want to do it anymore. It's turning into work now, so let's figure out something else.
No, I love that. And I think it's interesting, too, to seeing, when you were coming up on the exit from CJM, that was your primary thing, right? You have these other little projects that are kind of keeping things interesting around the house, I'm sure. But when you're coming up on the exit, what were the circumstances of it, and what kind of got you to the point where you were ready to kind of step away from the business?
Well, I think one, you can't do all the other things unless you have a base. And I was just blessed, fortunate enough to have CJM as my base. I was able to grow it, which gave me a lot of latitude to dabble in the other things. So I think a lot of people could do it. I don't think I'm special or different in any way. I was just able to create or be in a position where I was able to do Rotary and Chamber and network, where other people were, that was their job. For me, that was my hobby. I love watching people. I love watching what they do, how they do it, why they do it. What's the motivation or what's the why, and then seeing how that works and how that fits into what other people are doing. So that networking part. And CJM was, because the way it was set up, we're a continental United States, so I didn't have to worry about what happens in Ankeny because my clientele wasn't in Ankeny. So I could run for school board and make decisions that I thought were in the best interest that didn't affect my business or affect my livelihood, where other people don't necessarily have that freedom or that ability. So kind of where that, I think your question was, after talking, your question was, what was the process of why that. So as CJAM grew, we knew we were in a space that we either had to take out competitors or be absorbed. You just get to the point you either have to grow or die. It's the old up, down, you market, you grow, you get there, you have to reinvent. And a business is no different. It has to, it lives and breathes. And you owe it to the employees to make sure that they always have an opportunity to do better. And that's growth. And some people look at growth as bad. I look at growth as just more opportunities for our employees to continue to be engaged in the community or to have somewhere to challenge them to move up, all those things. And when you get to the point where you're stagnant, now you have a choice. And we're at the point where I could have taken the next 10 years and just grown it. I would have had to, well, actually Renee was working on an app. We finally got it done. And then we sold.
Perfect timing.
She was not happy about that.
Oh, I'm sure.
Because there's a lot of work, a lot of time, a lot of blood, sweat, tears.
Sure. Was it like a CJM factoring app?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. It was a factoring app that allowed our customers more access, quicker turnaround. It saves employee costs, saves scanning and all the other things. So it allows you to be more. It's like going from Excel spreadsheets and typing everything in and sending out invoices and then sending out past dues, photocopy and mail them a past due, to now I can email you a past due. I can cut those corners, better service, more efficiency, and you can grow without having to add. And at that point, we just went through. So the other contributing factor is, took over in 2000, 2001, 9/11. Economy, everything stopped in transportation. We were in a growth mode, and all of a sudden you get hit. And then 2008, 9, the economy, lost half your business overnight, and you're struggling back from that. You hit 12 and 14 were really tough years, and then then COVID, everything kind of stopped, and you don't know if you're in business, you're out of business. I always said my biggest fear wasn't waking up in the morning because I'd always have a job because I could create my own job. That's, I think, the entrepreneur side is like, I don't want to work for myself, but I can.
Yep.
And you wake up going, okay, if I really, really screw up, I'm going to be fine. But now I have 23 other families and lives that are codependent on what decisions I make tomorrow. So if I make a bad one, it doesn't just, it's a trickle-down effect. And so you start putting that pressure on. And then you get to the point where, I'm at the point now where I have to invest a whole lot of money in technology. And again, I need to start acquiring, or I need to start looking at selling. Everybody said CGM Financial, that's who you are. That's your baby. That's your identity. And I said, no, that's the company I run. That's the company I work for. Everyone's like, you'd never sell that thing. And I'm like, yeah, I would. And, you grow it to sell it. And if you can be emotionally attached, but if you don't keep that idea in mind, you're not really doing your customers or your employees any service, in my opinion. Because even though you're really good, time will outlast the person in charge. The climate, the culture, and what you're building should be able to sustain itself. And that's, I think, when selling, that's what, that's the gold standard of did you grow it and make it so it's not just you, it's something bigger. So
Sure. So you were kind of coming up on that decision. It's like
It's philosophical.
buy or sell. At that point, what was kind of the turning point for you to kind of go down the route of exiting? Because I mean, like you said, you're at fork on the road. It's like 10 more years of my life and put more time into it and grow it, sell it. Like what kind of pushed you to do the exit
I think
option?
seeing the future. After,
you have a crystal ball.
Some people say I do. I think people are successful most people ask me how I got from point A to point B, and I'm like, I have no idea. So it's like a math question. Show your work. I don't know. The answer is 2, and everything else in between is an unknown resource. You just kind of see it or feel it. And I think management by feel is scares people. But I had the feeling that as after COVID, everything went to consolidation. Before COVID, everybody was branching out, entrepreneur. Everybody that was building their own job said they were an entrepreneur, and I'm like, wow, that's not really entrepreneurship. That's just creating a job. And so then all of a sudden, that huge expansion in that space contracted. And at 23 employees, or in the middle of Iowa, and what we were doing, we were just in that crossroads, those crosshairs. And I knew the bigger banks had more money in us. Interest rates were at the lowest they've ever been, which saved us, but I knew they were going to go up. And as soon as the interest rates went up, if you didn't have a lot of cash in the bank, and at that point I was borrowing $26 million a month from $700,000 when I started, and you're really tied to the interest and the growth and all that. And I knew that we had done a huge push to lower interest, and so all of our contracts were really tight. I mean, we went from, my first started probably 6%, and we were down to 1.5%. And so you can look at what that would do, and if you're tied to growth, you're gonna have to borrow money. And my dad always said, if you can't borrow money make a profit, it's probably a bad idea. And if you don't need to borrow the money, that means you've already arrived. So you're in that area. And to grow, I would have had to borrow a lot more money. I would have had to put more, my house up. And it just didn't really make sense, especially when there was a good opportunity to talk to other people. And I met a friend who sold, and he was my business partner and other stuff. And I said, why'd you sell? He goes, well, we were trying to acquire this other company, and they said, no, we're going to buy you. And it turned out really well. And I knew the broker that did it, and it was a Simpson guy.
Oh, there you go.
Yep. So the owner of the company is a Simpson grad, and so I trusted him and trusted his broker. Brett did really good by me, and always kept in touch and said, if you ever want to sell. And sat down one day and said, it's either we're going to go back to what we did 20 years ago, and I'm going to be here 80 hours a week, and we're going to double this thing, and we're going to ride it out for the next 20 years, or you sell it now and start retirement.
Sure. Because were you the sole owner at that point, or was there still a
No,
C and a J involved in the M?
No, I'd bought the company 3 times.
Okay.
So my mom and dad unfortunately divorced after 40 years, so we bought my dad out. So my mom owned it. Then I brought my brother in, and then my brother and I bought my mom out. I was still the primary, working 90% of the time. And then in 2014, I purchased the rest of the stock from my brother. And so from 2014, I kind of worked for everybody else, but I ran it. I mean, I was the managing partner. I was the day-to-day. And so from 2014 on, I was able to do what I wanted and not have the constraints of shareholders.
Sure.
Which is kind of nice because, when somebody says you should do this, it's like, sorry, my partner won't let me. You don't have that excuse now. So now it's all you.
You're like looking in the mirror like, this guy,
this
guy.
There's nobody to toss off the bad decisions to, or even the ones you don't want to make. You just say, you know what you have to do, but it's sometimes easier to have some cover. And when you don't have partners and you don't have boards or you don't have other things, you have no cover. So then it's just you.
Sure, absolutely. Well, I think it was definitely COVID just sounds like it was just a crazy time for you with the exiting the business because you sold in 2020, right? Or 2021?
We started selling in 2020. Let me do the timeline. No, we decided after COVID in 2020 to sell. We started putting it up on the market in 21 January. Mm-hmm. We had by March, we had 32 letters of interest.
Okay.
We narrowed that down to 8, and then in April, May, we sat, and they would fly in, and one from Canada. They had to fly in, be quarantined back then in 21.
Mm-hmm.
So we'd fly in, we'd meet them at a country club the broker had set up. NCP was the broker, and we'd interview them, they'd interview us.
Mm-hmm.
And we went from, there were some that were companies that were investment companies, so we were just part of the portfolio. That came with, hey, you got to stay for 2 years, you get X, and then your blue sky is in the 2 years if you make this happen, this happen, this happen, and we give you the rest. And I kind of looked at them and said, well, if I'm going to grow the business, why wouldn't I just keep the business and grow it and
Sure.
just keep everything?
Yep.
Why do I need to do that? So we had those strategic investor groups that we're doing, which was good to look at. We had some investor groups, I can say it, Love's Trucking Centers. They flew in their private jet out of Oklahoma City, came down, sat down, and told us we're going to give you X, and it's a lot more money than I thought I'd ever get, but we're moving everything to Oklahoma City. So,
yeah.
And
when you got to think about your own interests, like,
yeah.
Holy cow, a huge pot of money, but also you got 23 employees and their whole families that might be out of a job or would have to relocate.
And we knew that going in, that our primary would be, we wanted a company that had a culture and climate that we had, somebody that wanted to maintain an office and maintain the connection with the community. So so that was one of our non-negotiables. And so you always talk to the brokers like, we told you that was a non-negotiable. He goes, yeah, but it was a lot of money. So it's kind of like we had to allow them to do the offer because we said that was one we would not sell. There's just certain trigger points that we wouldn't do. I'm not going to work for the next 3 years or 2 years. Some of those things but I think a good broker, a good attorney, a good CPA will say, here's some options, and you need to look at them. I mean, you're making a decision, a multi-million-dollar decision, and you haven't looked at all the options. Mm-hmm. And so that was a really good process. I think that, you have a couple of people you sell to an employee, somebody that knows the business, or you sell like we did outside of our scope. Mm-hmm. So. And we thought about selling to employees. We made those offers too, but it didn't pan out, and so we had to go outside.
Sure. When I think just the next steps of the business, people don't plan secession ever. It's like, oh, well, I'll keep doing this forever. I've had jobs in the past where it's like, what's the secession plan for the company? Like, no clue. It's like, okay, well, that's not really. That's kind of disheartening as an employee because it's like. If the owners all decide to sell it tomorrow and we're all fired, like that sucks. Yeah. So it's like just kind of having the clarity of like where you want to go with it is nice.
And in 2018, I think it was, I had open heart surgery. I think that was an eye opener. That was part of the, the process. You find out you're not invincible. This is not a permanent thing. Your employees find that out too. It's like, oh, what happens when the leader's not leading? How's it set up? What are the redundancies? What are all the things? So I think, a preponderance of evidence gets you to sell, but you should have that idea in mind. The minute you start a business, you should think about, what happens when it's X. Do I keep it? Do I hire more people? Do I try to fold it in, or do I try to acquire something else to make it, strategic? I mean, you should always be thinking that way, and I think that's how I always thought. Maybe it's the coaching, the teaching. You always got to, if you teach, you have to have 5 different ways of addressing a student to say, okay, you need to read it, you need to hear it, you need to do it, you need to feel it, you need to, all the things, you need to say it. So how do you get all that out of a business? And I think just saying I'm doing my business and moving forward is not necessarily always conducive to what you probably should be doing.
Right. Well, and I think just, again, you can have a plan, and then...
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
What's the Mike Tyson quote? Everybody's got a plan, so you get punched in the face.
Yeah, you get punched in the face.
That's the time-tailed quote there. Because I think it definitely is like, just you have to feel it and know, because I think especially with your heart surgery and just a health scare in general, it's like you get a lot... I mean, everybody thinks they're invincible till you almost get in a car accident, and you're like, oh my gosh, like I'm going to hug my kids a little tighter when I get home tonight. Like that type of thing, right? You just, the mortality, the awakening of like, if I've only got so much time, I should be doing something that I'm enjoying, or that like You just knowing that you have time ahead of you.
Well, I think most people that are successful love what they do, and so they don't look at it as. I mean, I never really looked at that as being work anymore. It was more of a lifestyle, or it's it's who you are, and it's fun. But again, if you're going to grow it, you wake up that day, and I think you wake up that day thinking I could be fine, but there's a lot of other people that are dependent on what you do, and I think that was probably the big eye opener, was when you look at other people and say, oh wow, if this all goes screaming down tomorrow, what happens? What happens to us? Well, we can figure that out, but we've always figured that out. But what happens to everybody else that's in there? So
sure. Well, and I think, like you said, it's the highs and the lows, because you mentioned, I mean, when we've kind of touched on this a little bit too, but your late wife Renee passed away, and that same time as you're exiting the business, it was about like the same time. So I'm sure that had some kind of effect on too, like you looked at that fork in the road, and it's like you could have put another 10 years in the business, but how did you feel about exiting the business around that same time?
It sucked.
Yeah. When it comes to her, I know that was how we met, and because she was very involved in Simpson as well. And I always said too, like she was kind of the piece that got me into entrepreneurship when I was talking with her. I'm sure that had to have a huge impact on just the feeling of when you exit a business, it's supposed to be nothing but rainbows and sunshine and happiness. How did that kind of affect your takeaways on it?
Well, first she didn't want to sell, so that was, when you have partners or people you care about, she didn't want to sell. She thought, it'd be a bad idea to sell. And we finally got to the point where, okay, I can see how we can sell to this company because their climate, their culture, they'll do right by our employees. They'll stay in the community, those kind of things. So when we got to that point, then it was all about the hard negotiations, the paperwork, and you can't worry about the pennies because the hundreds are going to take care of themselves. And so, just that different view of looking at it, and knowing that in the end, it's, you're supposed to sell. I'm somewhat, if the sale would have happened, sorry.
Oh, you're fine.
So the process of the sale, we were supposed to be done by July. Because of how we chose to sell it, there were, because of regulations and stuff like that, we were unregulated, and going into the banking industry, it became regulated. And that really stalled a lot of things. So we would have been exited, been out of town, been gone. Some of the other stuff wouldn't have probably happened.
Mm-hmm.
So you're in that mix. You start, a company business that, arguably grew two different ways. Renee was involved in employee engagement and climate and culture and all the things that really matter. I'm engaged in making sure that things are paid and that the everything's taken care of so we can get the money in order to keep in business. So it was a different strategic looks that I wouldn't have had the capability of. That's why you really need a partner. Mm-hmm. But it's nice not having a partner because you don't have to answer to that. But having different looks at the business, and so the hard part about the sale and the process was it took too long. I didn't see that one coming. Mm-hmm. You think that, you got all your ducks in a row, you got everything in a row. And when you start looking at the sale, everything that is exposed is exposed. And it's kind of, the old saying is if you're going to be in business, you better have a really good attorney. You better have a really good CPA. You probably have a priest and make sure that you share that information. Mm-hmm. When you're selling, if you're selling to the right people, you're getting dug into on every aspect, social media to everything. So going through that process and then having it delayed, and it didn't even close till December 23rd. So Renee had gotten sick and went through that. She had passed. I was in the middle of a school board election because we were selling. Like, well, what else am I going to do?
Sure.
Well, I'd done it before, so it was just going through that whole process. The long story short is I was lucky enough or blessed enough or had enough people, support networks, whether it was good friends and legal and accounting, and my employees were very loyal, and as soon as we could tell them, we were very straightforward with them. We introduced the buyers to them early on, so that they could interview and knew that things were not going to change. Gladero still runs the office, the Ankeny branch. They're out of South Dakota, so it's a 5-hour trip for corporate to come down. But so a lot of those things that you just don't anticipate, how do you manage? And the only way you manage is to have a Joey Beach in your corner, or you just go down the list. And I think that's the good part about employee engagement and community engagement was that. The hard part was we were so engaged in the community that it hurt.
Sure. Well, and just the ripple effect, of everything, like the business, the school, the community, everyone kind of, it touched everybody. So I think that's a huge part too. I don't know if I'd mentioned to you, but when we were at her visitation, I was in the long line of people, and long. I was like laughing when I got to the front because I was basically at a networking event because there's all these people from the business community, and we're just talking, and it was hilarious because we were just sitting there and having a conversation, normal conversation, and there was a guy that was next to me that was like, this is going to sound really weird, but can I have a business card? And I just started laughing. I'm like, Renee is looking down on us today because people are literally networking at her funeral. I was like, this is the only way it could go.
Well, and that's why they called her the Chief Nexus Officer, which I came up with, by the way. She's trying to figure out what her title would be. So I don't want to be president. I don't want to be this or that. But in their own companies, Nexus was, a crossroads. And that's so I don't know. We started the Renee D. Murphy Foundation after, so that's one of the things, of leadership and scholarships, and we had always, all of our philanthropy had always been education based, whether it was character counts, books for Belize, those areas. That's kind of all what we've always done. Simpson, so anything I had to do with education, so it was just kind of a natural. She always looked at networking as just learning, and that was always the kind of, I call it the linchpin of our business. As long as we keep learning, as long as our employees keep learning, keep growing. I mean, that was just a thing. So yeah, it was interesting, the ripple effect.
Absolutely. One, I think I always try to give credit where credit's due. When I first was interested in doing video, I reached out to the alumni office and said, hey, is there anybody in the community that we know that I could connect with? And they referred me to Renee, and Renee got me in touch with Joey because she put it out, and Joey's like, well, we could do some videos. So 9 years ago, Renee connected me with Joey, and Joey was my first paying client I ever had for videos, and now here we are, like 9 years later, and I have a full-time business doing this. I have a studio. It's just crazy. I try to really keep in touch with those initial nexus points, to your point, because if people don't give you a shot, you're dead in the water. And everyone always says, oh, I'm self-made. No, you're not. You're the sum. You're the sum of all the people that took a chance on you, whether it was their first customer, your spouse, your investor, whatever. And I think that's the thing, is if you can be the nexus point in everyone else's life, it's like the power that you have, the impact. And I think that's really where you want to strive to be in life.
I always laugh that people talk about being successful, and they're like, well, you're successful. And I'm like, well, no, really, I rode on a lot of coattails. I mean, my dad gave me a really good start. He didn't know, I mean, he knew what he had. He always wanted to go public with it, and sell an IPO and stuff because he had from the banking side. But I was able to see something good and keep doing good with it. I think that the people that you surround yourself with, to your point, I really can't say the success that we had was anything I did, but it was what everybody else did. And which is kind of odd because you think, okay, I did this, and this. I'm like, nah, I just saw some really good people that did just good things. I mean, I remember when you came to do your video and Joey had called up and said, hey, we got this young guy, and he's really good, and we want to use him at ADC. And I was on ADC, and where's he from? Who is he? He goes, well, he went to Simpson. I'm like, well, he's going to be good then.
There you go.
It's just that networking that there's a product. That's why that's why we did so well in continental United States, because Iowa people just looked at us as being honest and trustworthy and hardworking. And it was good. You get people out of California and the East Coast and East Coast. I remember one time I cut off the whole East Coast. I said I wouldn't do any business with any credit with anybody on the East Coast.
Sure.
And somebody said, you can't do that. It's against fair lending laws. I'm like, I'm not lending. I'm buying receivables. I'm not buying anything from over there.
Sure.
And did that for about 5 months. But you start looking at, how do you be successful? And that's the key is the company you keep.
Absolutely.
And Renee was really good at identifying the strengths and the weaknesses and then putting those two things together, and then hands off doing checks every once in a while. Hey, how things are going?
Sure.
But other than that, she was very good at that.
Sure.
Which benefited our company and me, because she was good at putting people in front of me that were quality and actually did all the work. I just kind of rode along. So.
Sure. Well, and there's definitely there's two sides to every business, right? There's the process, there's the doing of the service, and then there's the people. And it's like, if you're really good at one, you're probably not the good at the other. So you got to have somebody that's the yin to the yang to kind of keep it all together, And
I think that's what we get out of a liberal arts education now from Simpson. We're able to kind of move into all those. I remember taking a theater class. I'm like, what am I going to use this? This is stupid. And, next thing I know, years later, if I didn't know what raked seating was and some other things, I couldn't have a general conversation with somebody just because I was forced to learn something outside of what I would normally do. And for me, those are the people I like to hire. People are like, well, I have an education. I'm like, great. That means you can do this, this, and this. But some of my most successful employees were, ones with master's degrees and some that just got a GED. And it depends on your people skills and how you can interact with those people around you and problem solve.
Sure.
And I think that's why I liked Simpson, or that's why, and Renee went to Simpson too. And that feeling of being able to problem solve and fix things. Mm-hmm. and not break things, hopefully.
When I remember I talked to her, and I was probably 3 years post-grad at this point. I was like 25, 24, 25. And I was talking to Renee because she was on the board at the time. And she's like, Ryan, we need some young blood. Like, you should run for the board. I'm like, the board of trustees for the college? I'm like, yeah. I just bought my first house. Like, I'm not even close to knowledgeable enough. And she's like, we need somebody that understands. Like, it was just so funny because and the first thing she said was, she's like, why not? Like, what if? Just ask the question of well, why not? And I thought that was really interesting. Of most people would think of all the reasons not to do something. And she was like, find the one reason you should do it and do it. And I was like, that's pretty cool.
Well, and the flip side that nobody actually really gets to see is that the nerves. I have to go into this board of trustees meeting, and these are all really, really successful people. They're people I looked up to, and now I'm sitting in a room with them. Yep. And how do you do that? Because on the other side, you see that. Well, even me, I go to a meeting or a board. I'm like, these are some really high flyers that have really done some really good things and are very successful. And I think that's the hard part. You look up to, and then all of a sudden you're in the room. Yeah. And what's that feel like? Because it's intimidating. I still.
What does that feel like? I mean, you lived it, right? You've done it.
I still feel it, which is the hard part. You all of a sudden it's like, hey, we'd like you to come do a podcast. It's like, oh, I'm not. There's no way I should be doing a podcast. There's no way I should be having that opportunity. There's so many other people that are more deserving or can do better. Sure. And then you get done and they're like, okay, that didn't suck. Sure. But I think most of the really, really strong, influential people that I know are also very unsure. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what keeps our edge.
Sure.
Because we're just unsure. It's like, wow, I'm unsure. I'm sitting here doing this.
Sure. Well, I think, and I've heard interesting things too, where people that have climbed the corporate ladder and they think, oh, somebody that's doing, they're an executive C-suite, they're making millions a year, like they've got it all figured out. And then you meet those people and you're like, they're just as confused as I am. They just have a higher paycheck than I do. So it's like, once you kind of reverse engineer that, but I could imagine like you're in these board meetings and you're like, oh my God, there's like Terry Lillis, like former CFO principal. And oh my gosh, there's this guy that was like, this
CEO
person.
of Casey's. And,
it's like little old me, but you got to give yourself some credit. I mean, you've ran a successful business for 20 years. You have knowledge that is very valuable in that situation.
Well, and Renee would sit in those meetings too. And what I would tell her, I said, what you don't realize is you're bringing something to the table that they haven't seen. Mm-hmm. And that's how you make a good organization.
Sure.
And how do you get those, that diverse thought process coming in? And I said, yeah, they're all successful at A, B, C, and D, but what you do, they're looking at you like you're a guru in this. And once you finally realize that you have something to bring or you wouldn't have been there, then bring that to the table, and it really, really it calms you down a little bit, but
sure.
You still get nervous. I mean, I still get nervous sitting there talking to ex-CEOs of principal and knowing the organization, the size of the organization that they did. And, they look at you like, well, you're successful here. And then you go back and think, well, if I would have went in corporate, would I have been that successful? Would I have been able to do that? Mm-hmm. And I don't know. I think most people that are successful are probably cocky enough to say I probably could, but
sure.
I don't have to prove it now.
It sounded like, especially when you were employee number one, you had just one other person. Like all you needed was just the right kick in the ass, and you got stuff figured out. And I think that's what most people need. Where some people are just natural, like workhorse mentality type people, and that's great to have that. But I also think like having the why is huge, because even for my business, like I was doing it for 5 years on the side, just kind of a fun little thing. But once my wife and I were like, we're paying all of our consumer debt off. We want to get married. We want to buy a house and not have all this like over our heads. I looked in the mirror. I'm like, let's get your ass to work. And that's exactly what I did. So like once you have those like cornerstone, I always call them the aha moments in your mind of like
epiphanies,
you're like, what am I doing? I think that's what happens. So even if you did go corporate, I feel like if you had an aha moment, it's like, I'm going to figure this out.
I think probably the best, there's a couple of good quotes that somebody had told me. One was, when the conquistadors came, which is really a bad example because they slaughtered a bunch of people, but they burnt the ships. And he said, conquer or die. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's motivation.
Yep.
You have no choice. I mean, you burnt the bridges. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs purposefully will burn some bridges so they can't go back. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you look at them and you shake your head going, you probably shouldn't have done that. But the other times you have to look at them and say, wow, that's commitment, because you have nowhere else to go. And I think, some people are motivated differently. I kept my bridge open. I'm like, I could always go back and teach. I could always do that. But my motivation was a little different. The other one is I like sci-fi, and the old Star Trek one of, your father did this. I dare you to do better. Mm-hmm. And so what's that look like? And so, most of us, I really wanted to make my dad proud. I didn't want to muck it up too bad and say, well, it didn't work out. I'm going to go back to teaching, and I know we're planning on retiring sooner or later, but you got to go back to work, kind of thing. So,
because how long after is he still with us, or did he pass away?
No, ironically, Dad passed 2020 December 21st, and Renee passed 2021 October 21st. So
oh my gosh,
10 months to the day. It's kind of odd because they're buried right next to each other, and you really don't think about those things. That's something you don't, succession planning, or, I didn't realize I really needed revocable trust.
Yep. Right.
It's like, what's that? Like, well, that keeps things where they're supposed to be. So, and, being, when Dad passed, having to work through that. And then when Renee passed, you think, well, it's pretty easy. I mean, why do you need a will? There's some very important legal things that you should do at a young age. So I'm giving you some advice right now.
Sure.
Make sure you have a will. Make sure you have a plan, because
we got one.
You just don't know.
We got life insurance figured out. Got the wills. We have a death day folder. If something terrible happens, people are notified, and where the money goes and the properties and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So.
And you don't think of. You just don't. That's not. You could be a really good, smart business person. You can do all the things that you think you're going to do, but you just don't. Well, it's like to sell the business. Certain things you just don't see coming. And how do you manage that kind of stress point? Do you compartmentalize? Do you take it head on? Do you list it out and knock it off? Or I did it for a long time. Just it's the old cover up, let them beat you, and then you're good. So I did the old rope-a-dope and just said, you know what, I'm not doing anything, and I'm just sitting and just let it come.
Sure.
And then you after the storm blows over, now what do? Start to clean up and start working at it. Ideally, you'd have some planning before the storm. So
sure. Do you feel like you said you wanted, like, main thing was make your dad proud of what you did with the business?
Yeah.
What did he ever say he was proud? I know dads are always notorious for never telling us how they actually feel. Did he ever tell you how he felt about how you handled it?
He last 4 or 5 years. And he was pretty healthy, but he had fell and broke his neck, and that kind of changed some things. But I would go to breakfast once a week with him and just ask him questions. You remember this person? He goes, yeah. I go, how'd you handle that? So just that institutional knowledge of having access to a different view, and then being able to say, oh, we've done this, and how many receivables you're doing this month, how many employees do you have? When we expanded, we'd do ribbon cuttings, and he'd come to the ribbon cuttings, and you just you could tell. And my dad was very good at, we call them Murphy attaboys, and I still use them, which is really bad, because it's like, oh, you did that? That's awesome. That's great. I mean, that's, wow. Now that's a standard. That's, I'm where I'm measuring you. If you do that again, it doesn't really count.
Yep.
And so it was always a Murphy attaboy, where it's like, attaboy, you did great. What's your next step? Because now that's just
now what
expected. Well, you did that. I expect you to do that every day now. And it was a stretch goal, or it was a stretch, and then now it's just an expectation. It's like, So I think that, just that continual, movement, motivation, that's like done that, been there, got the T-shirt, or wherever the vernaculars are that they use.
Sure. Well, I know, like, I have a young son and a daughter on the way, and I know that's a huge thing for me in parenthood is, like, tell your kids you're proud of them, but actually mean it. Don't just say it to say it, like, oh, I'm so proud of you. But it's like, when they do good stuff, tell them they're doing good stuff. People thrive on that, like, good stuff.
Well, and that's hard. I mean, because I don't think I do that very well. I think I'd always, when I coached, I did it, but with my own children or my own employees, I wasn't really good at that.
Just praising people for doing a good job.
Yeah, it was just, for me, I think I did it in my head and didn't. I don't think you ever do it enough, but I also think you can do it too much on a certain level. And so, as when and where, and find out what what they want. I mean, for me, when people I really didn't like getting sunshine pumped up me. So it's like, no, I'm self-motivated. You don't, if I go to Farrell's, I'll be fine. You don't have to tell me, come on, let's go, let's do that. I wasn't a rah-rah person. So which meant I wasn't really a rah-rah person. But it was kind of nice because Renee was, and she would say, listen, you have this going on, or this person's afraid to come see you. And I'm like, well, it sucks for them. I don't have to talk to them, right?
Tough shit.
Yeah, it's like, wow, they're afraid to come see me. That's too bad. But that's not, you have a bigger, to lead, you got to be able to lead. So,
sure. Which
means you got to get out of your own comfort zone. And it's nice to have somebody telling you that.
Like, Trent, open your door once in a while. Like, no, they knock if they want to come in. Like, no, open the door. Yep. That's cool. So I think it's interesting. I mean, we could talk for hours, I'm sure, about everything that's going on. What are you up to now? I mean, you've exited the business. It's been a couple years since then. Are you doing, is there more businesses in the works going on? You mentioned the real estate stuff. What's next for Trent Murphy?
Wow. Well, obviously moving on, from life, finding somebody you care about is important. You can't do it alone. Kind of reintegrating, family. I have a kind of a small family. My daughters are in town, trying to figure that out. They lost their mom, but, in the process, they probably lost their dad. The company's no longer there, so if you had any ideas as a child, say I'm going to take over the family business, all that was kind of pulled out at the same time. So just reintegrating with that. For me, community involvement, philanthropy. Selling the company when we sold, we knew we were going to set a set amount aside, a sum aside that we just use for philanthropy, for Simpson or for now we have the Renee D. Murphy Foundation and leadership and stuff like that. Started let's see, it would be Matt, Laura, Stacy, Julie, a group of people came together in the community, started Community Champions, and that's just a 503c. So, somebody gets sick and gets hurt, they want to fundraise, but it's not tax deductible, so they have to run it through something. So Ankeny Community Champions was started on that. So I sit on that board.
Okay.
The Renee Foundation is under that because that was it was an easy. All of a sudden something tragic happens. We had a fundraiser. Everybody wanted to come back and remember. You wanted to do something good, with something that turned out bad, and so Ankeny Community Champions started with that. So doing all those things seems taken up all my time.
Sure.
With
so you're not
Simpson.
enjoying retirement as some people would experience it, like you're just on the beach all day sipping Mai Tais. Like what? I mean, I know you went on vacation recently.
I like people to think that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Everybody's like, "Oh, you travel. You're never home." They're like, "Well, I'm home a lot more than you think," which is actually kind of nice because then nobody calls and asks you things. So
sure.
It's more of a.
They assume you're perpetually out and away from your phone or your computer.
And when I used to own CJM, it was nice because Galadriel would always, block all that. So you always had something that's like, oh no, he's in a meeting, or it was always kind of nice. When then you're retired and people like, oh, he's, it's just not doing anything. And then now they think I'm too busy, so then I don't get the questions, so you got to find that general medium.
Sure.
But with Ankeny Chamber is very vibrant. The Rotary is vibrant. Community Champions is vibrant. Board of Trustees at Simpson. I mean, all these things are vibrant with Orbis, and being able to give back or being able to contribute. And what's that look like? I haven't really found that niche yet. But I think that comes with, selling a business in and of itself is it's fun, exciting, but it's also a loss. Renee a loss. So.
Yeah, it's the good with the bad, right?
Yeah.
It's the highs of the highs when you're, you've been working towards that, it's the exit, and you do it, and then the lows of losing some of the closest people. And I commend you for how you've gone through this. And obviously, it's a very touchy subject, and I really do appreciate you coming on and sharing more with us, because I think there's so much to learn about, like you said, just the waves of entrepreneurship. It's like, okay, I gotta my back's against the wall, I gotta figure this out. And then the highs of the highs where it's like, we're looking to sell this business for millions of dollars. Like, how awesome is that?
Yeah.
Just the highs of that.
And you can't tell anybody, or you can't tell me how much you sold it for, or there's just all the constraints that you have. It's like, so to me, it's like selling your first house. Mm-hmm. So you sell your house, and you're like, I want a bigger house. It's going to be great, and then you get everything cleaned out, and you're on the floor crying because this is your house. Well, then you buy another house, and then you sell that, and you're on the floor crying because you just sold that house. So I think each one of the steps that you take, there's the kind of the bittersweet, mm-hmm. and I think as a general rule, most people look at the negative side of it, and as a general rule, I think those that are really successful and able to handle things have hope and look for the positive side, mm-hmm. and that's sometimes a hard thing to do. What's positive about what happened over the last, how did COVID have anything positive to do with anything? Mm-hmm. And there are some things in there. I don't think, I think, God doesn't give us these kind of things for no reason.
Sure. Well, I think it's all, life is a lot less about what happens to you and more about how you handle it.
Yeah.
And I think, especially with the foundation you've set up and just the core principles of who Renee was and the things you guys did as a couple and I still see you doing those things, which is really cool to see. I mean, Simpson and education's been a huge cornerstone of both of your guys' lives for years, and educating and the Orbis stuff. And I think you're still got your finger on the pulse with that stuff, which is really cool to see.
Well, and having a base and finding also somebody that has that same base to share it with is important. I think that part of the healing process is moving forward.
Sure.
And what that looks like, I don't know.
Sure.
But it's a lot. It's exciting. It's fun. What learn from the past, but the future. If you don't keep looking toward the future, and I think running a business helped me understand that, because you could say I just got the crap kicked out of me for the last year during 2009. I don't want to do this anymore. I want to give up. I don't want to. And then you get back on your feet and you start moving forward, and you're like, oh, this is fun again. I can do this. I can learn from the mistakes. I can see all the great things I did before, but now it's, the next iteration. How's that look? And so that's been a challenge, but.
Mm-hmm. No, and I think it's been just super cool to see, again, the businesses you've been involved in, and just the creator of an impact that you've made. I think it's just so cool to see, because like I've mentioned, there's a lot of people that exit a business or they retire and you never see them again. They're off doing their own thing and they're being selfish, which I mean, they should, right? Like,
I want to do that every day.
Do it. Go crazy.
But it's so much more fun doing I think it's selfish. Because it's fun. It's fun doing the chamber stuff. It's fun. The things that I get to do now are things I was able to do before, and they're just fun.
Sure.
It's fun giving back. Will I ever ride off into the sunset? Like, thought about it more than once. A lot of my friends said, we don't want you to disappear after, everything that you've done, everything you went through, don't disappear. Mm-hmm. So, and, it's easy. I thought about it, I really, really thought about it. I could just head down to Florida, hit a boat, and,
be perpetually fishing the rest of your life. Which,
fishing, just doing that. But where's that? How does that giving back?
Mm-hmm.
When you're able to reach some success, a lot of people do it in different ways. I just happen to have a good network of friends that I enjoy doing it with. So
Sure. Well, one of my best friends, he's a scuba dive instructor in the Keys, and he's just now getting his pilot's license, and he'll be a commercial pilot very shortly. So if you ever need a private charter to come back to Iowa faster than normal,
that'd be fun.
Let me know and I can connect you with him, and then that might give him an excuse to come stop in Ankeny, and we can go meet up for lunch or something. So
I have a good one for your next podcast. My neighbor and his son built an airplane, and then now they're flying. They're in like the I don't know, Polk City.
Oh, I saw that. The Polk City Living magazine.
Yeah, right.
I used to read it perpetually. No, there's a really funny column that was not funny, but it's like one of the columnists that wrote in there, she just retired. So my wife and I would sit and we would, instead of like reading the newspaper, we would read the magazine. And that was our like fun, like gather around the fireplace, children, we're going to read the like it was really stupid. So I did read that article. So it's interesting that you mentioned that.
It's fun. Maybe that's what I should do for the next iteration. I want to write short stories or business, stories. Here's what happened. Here's how it applies to a business, or here's how it, I always did ones on squirrels, and there's a spaghetti story. And Randy's always like, you got to start with that story to get, you start a story to get interest, and then you move forward with, what's it mean?
Sure. So, the purpose, like you got their attention, now what?
Yeah. What's it mean? So
sure. No, I absolutely think that's strong. So in closing, we've talked about a lot. I really do appreciate you coming out for the podcast. For those that are entrepreneurs or considering kind of like starting a business, taking over a business, similar to you when you were kind of just on that cusp of like, do I teach or do I help dad out? What advice would you give to people that are really strongly considering going into the business world and taking a chance on themselves?
Well, one, I dare you to do better. That's Star Wars or Star Trek quote. I dare you to do better than the person that you looked at that got you involved in doing it, because somebody started it. So keep your head about you. Don't. I'd recommend you don't burn the ships. Keep an exit strategy, but understand the exit strategy should be a lot harder than moving forward. So if you're going to pull the trigger and do it, have an exit strategy, but understand that you want it to be difficult to exit. I think that probably the most important thing is to surround yourself with not cheerleaders or people who just pat you on the back and say, groupies, because everybody will be. It's a great idea. You should do that. Surround yourself with people that are real, that understand that there are limitations, that understand that you have to know a little bit about everything. You better be the best salesperson in the room. You better be the best numbers person in the room. You better be the best innovator in the room. You better be the best motivational person in the room. You better be the hardest worker in the room. And if you can check all those off, then you can be an entrepreneur. If you can't check most of those off, probably do something different. I also think that the other thing that I think makes me nervous now that didn't before, I think you have to go work for somebody else in an organization so you can see what you want to do and what you don't want to do. I think we're training, it sounds like I'm really old, which I am, but I think we're training young people to come out and say, I can just do this. And I think that's a mistake. I think that until you're in an organization or a system and seeing how that works, because obviously it's successful, it's still there. I mean, I would recommend you come to work at CJM for 5 years and then branch out. Probably not steal my customers, probably not take my idea, but see what a process looks like and how to make it work. Being a small business, being a large business, and then try to take that knowledge and utilize it with your education or what you're really excited about. Get some street cred is my biggest advice. You just can't come out and do it. And you might be able to. I mean, the tech guys do it. The .coms might have done it, but I think that's it's like getting drafted at the NFL. It's a long shot. So keep that under. You can't always be an entrepreneur. You have to work for somebody sometimes, and then you can be an entrepreneur.
Sure, I love that advice. I think there's a lot to glean from that. People think you'll be invincible. You got this idea, you bang on your chest, you just jump off a cliff and build the parachute on the way down. Yeah. And sometimes it's nice to maybe go fly in a plane that works a couple times and figure out how to fly without crashing, and then go and jump and do the whole thing, and you see it already.
But I'm very committed. I'm like, yes, you are. And yes. You're going to be committed if you keep doing what you're doing, this kind of thing. So, yeah, I think that's the hard part. I think that the expectation is anybody can do it, and they can. But, look around, keep your eyes open, pick up as much, meet with people like me as much as you can. I remember telling Renee set me up with they were going to do a partnership and they were brothers, and I said that's a bad idea because mine turned out bad.
Yeah,
so that's a bad idea. One, having a partner is a bad idea. It's never worked. I've never known a partnership that stayed.
They always say the best or the worst ships are partnerships because they always say.
and it's I think that's hard because if you're somebody brings something to the table, and then there's always, that dominant side where you're like, if I could just do what I wanted to do and I didn't have to answer to anybody, I would do well. And those are your best partners, but your worst partner. And I remember sitting there saying it's a bad idea, and you know what? They've done great, and I was totally wrong, but they listened and they said, I hear you. And I think they put some things in place that help mitigate that because they were warned ahead of time or advised. I call warned probably bad word.
Don't do it.
Yeah, don't do it. But they were advised and they saw something different. It wasn't everybody saying it's roses and kisses the whole time. So, another friend of mine, their daughter is a doctor. He's a doctor, and so became a doctor. And I said, what was the best advice that your dad gave? He said, embrace the suck. You gotta be a little bit open to just getting the crap kicked out of you and covering up and like Muhammad Ali said, rope-a-dope, just keep getting hit until they're punched out and then you're ready. Mm-hmm. So, that patience part, a lot of entrepreneurs aren't very patient. They want it yesterday and being over patient is probably a problem too. So, yeah.
No, I love that. No, it's been super great to talk with you. And I know if there's any people that are wanting to connect with you, where's the best place? Probably LinkedIn, or where would you refer people if they want to learn more about you?
Hit me an email, Trent@murphyent.com for enterprises. I'm not an ENT, so
Sure.
but usually email. I find that I lose things. Well, Facebook on Instant Messenger, and then I read it and I go back because I've had 10, and all of a sudden I'm like, oh, I didn't respond to that one. And
Yep.
you probably know that.
Sure, yeah. I have to always leave messages unread or else I can't. So Paige will look at my phone, there's like a million read things, but I'm like, once I read it and let it go, then it's gone.
Yeah,
So.
and I think that's the hard part. Scheduling is always difficult. I find that I don't like to schedule. I like people to just give me some times and I can pick.
Sure.
Because on the other side, I spent all my life choosing everybody's times and picking everything. And even when I was teaching, I would come home and say, don't ask me a question. What do you want for dinner? I'm like, I don't care.
Sure.
Just put something in front of me. If I get another question, I'm going to explode. So I think some of those things, just reach out. And I'll do the best I can to meet up. I enjoy hearing other people, seeing what they're going to do. It's the easy part. I don't have to do anything. I can give you advice. It's like staying at the Holiday Inn. It's like,
Sure.
yep, I stayed at the Holiday Inn last night. I got the best advice in the world because it's all on you after that.
Sure. No, I love that. So yeah, we'll definitely put that in the show notes below. Thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate just being open with us about the experiences that you've had the last 20 years and just some of the lessons you've learned. I think that's been a really great conversation. So we really appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate what you do. I'm proud to see where you've been because I was there when you started, and seeing where you're going is exciting to watch.
Sure. Well, thank you so much. And thanks everybody for tuning in. My name is Ryan Snod. It rhymes with odd, and you're listening to the Rhymes and Odd podcast. Peace.